think we should be good to get started. First off, I want to say welcome. I've seen several of you before, but for those who I haven't met, my name's Zach. I am the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Law and Innovation. I'm a 3L, and so I have at least one 2L from the journal here, so that way you guys can get a little bit of a perspective both from myself and from Robert. And then we're also going to hear from Professor Yu, who will tell you about how the journal fits into kind of the larger experience at Penn for those interested in law and technology. But first, again, I just want to say welcome. And I know that you guys are all busy. I know it's kind of in the middle of the LPS memo timeline. So if there's anyone who couldn't make it, please let them know that it's going to be recorded, and we'll share that around. As well as I'll put my email in the chat. And so if you or anyone you know has questions about what we talked about today, or honestly anything about Penn Law and your experience here, feel free to reach out at any point. I'm happy to either give you the answer that I can or point you in the direction to someone who can get you the answer. I guess we'll turn it over now to Professor Yu if you want to give us a quick introduction. And I think most people will know you by now, but for those who don't.
Well, I wouldn't presume, but yeah, I'm a professor. I'm the founding director of the Center for Technology Innovation and Competition. I teach internet law, privacy, working at HRUST, and a bunch of other things. But more importantly, I am one of the people who really are deeply committed to this journal. And one of the things that Zach just said really emphasizes one of the points that we'd like to make, which is he just offered as an upperclassman to help to reach out to lowerclassmen. And this is the sense of community that knits us together. And as law students, that's most important. I think that's important generally. And if you look at all studies of successful people and organizations, they say mentorship is by far the most important. You 1Ls are going to be facing a bunch of things you've never faced before, such as upper level course selection, OCI and summer jobs, and trying to figure out what is this thing, how do mid-courts fit into this? How do journals fit into this? Topic, how do I pick a note topic? Externships, internships, a whole wide, a trial, a wide range of experiences. And one of the things that I think I deeply appreciate from Zach did, I think that all the members of the journal who are in the 2L through class is there's an open hand, just because that's something that all of us depended on, and it's our way of paying it back. And it's just, it's a great thing to leverage the things they've learned. But I would say is those of us in the tech field, it's a little different. And so not just getting a generic or 2L or 3L giving you that advice. Having someone who's got the same orientation, interested in the same issues, I think is really important. But it also is, the journal has more than anything else, sort of gone far beyond my wildest expectations, because it's not only, it's a very unique design, because it reflects a commitment that great programs really bring the entire community together. You will see a lot of centers, even within Penn, but very commonly all over the place, which are essentially faculty playthings. And in fact, they're research oriented, and there's great work going on, but that has no impact on students' lives. You also see enormously successful student programs, which have no faculty involvement whatsoever. And there's an appropriateness, because I think we let the journal do a lot of, journals and student-run organizations have their autonomy. But to me, the best organizations bring together the entire community of faculty and students, and not just over teaching, but also research, and give a chance to really explore different things in an interactive way. And that has really, the journal has become the reification of that vision here at Penn. And I couldn't be happier with how every year the journal has existed. The students have come together amongst themselves to really create a fantastic community and a sense of shared mission that has been really, I think, it's been lovely to watch to me as someone who cares deeply about the field, but I think it's been very deeply rewarding for the students. But in addition, to me, it's also a place where you can interact with faculty. So one of the differences between this and all other journal, it's actually taught as a class in the first semester. And so in fact, we will study a subject matter we have every year. Last year when I did it, it was the role of government in promoting innovation aside from intellectual property, through subsidies, through taxes, through different kinds of programs, through public-private partnerships, and to try to understand all these different modalities of how we're doing it. This year was appropriately innovation in the time of COVID. Couldn't imagine something more timely. We've done things such as smart contracts, and it very much varies over the years. And you'll hear from Zach and the other students some more of the details, but Zach is a perfect example of one of the people who's chosen to engage us over 2 years and became not only a seminar member in his 2L year, but became a member of the board and leading the journal in his 3rd year. So there's a lot more I can say. The last thing I'll say is it's not just the interactions in the classroom. We do a happy hour every fall, virtual this year, obviously, because of necessarily, but it's a chance to interact between students and faculty in an informal way. And we also do support a team building exercise, or not exercise, a fun activity, a team building activity among the students to try to have this community come together in a lot of different ways. And the good news is we're also very flexible and open. If there's something new that we think that'll make this go even better, the journal just has to propose it. It's our job to try to find a way to make it work. So it's a really comfortable, flexible platform that really has been wonderful. And I'm delighted to see so many of you here, many of whom are in my class already. And it's really, I'm looking forward to the thing about law school organizations. They essentially have to reinvent themselves every 2 years. Because as one class graduates, by definition, there's only 2 years of people who've never known anything before. And so in some ways, it's your organization, it's our organization together. And so I'm delighted to see all you here to help us reinvent it in the coming year. And I'll hand it over back to Zach.
Great. Thank you, Professor Yu. And I guess kind of picking up where we left off, the journal really does represent a unique mix of faculty and student involvement. And it's unique amongst all the other journals at Penn, I feel pretty confident to say. And from what I can tell, it's unique among journals at other schools as well. And there's a lot of ways in which we structure how the journal operates, as well as just the nature of the students involved on the journal and the kind of community and culture that's been built that help facilitate that dialogue and that forum for everyone to meet and talk about an area of law or an area of kind of the world and being technology that we kind of share a common interest in. So let me quickly run down the general structure of the journal and how that general structure creates those benefits that Professor Yu started to hint at. And then we'll turn it over for kind of some Q&A and discussion at the end. So first, Professor Yu mentioned our journal meets in the fall in a seminar format. So each year, a member of the CTIC faculty will be our faculty advisor. This current year, it's Professor Wagner, who I believe some of you have had for 1L classes, as well as potentially intro to IP. 2 years ago is Professor Yu, or I guess last year is Professor Yu. And then 2 years ago, I believe it was Professor Hoffman and Tess Wilkinson-Ryan, who I actually just found out they have a podcast together too. So I guess that partnership is still going. So we really are lucky to have a professor who's embedded with us for the entirety of the fall semester. And that professor works with the students to come up with a topic around which the full year will be centered. So this year was innovation in time of crisis. And we really explored a whole host of questions that are opened by both the current pandemic as well as crisis in a broader sense. So things such as climate change, things such as the new AI movement and how that may impact the world. So we really had a broad net as far as the ideas that we looked at. And each week, we kind of explore different aspects of those topics. And I'll turn it over to Robert to give you a more full explanation of what that looks like in a minute. Then moving to the spring semester is when we start the real journal aspect. So we invite a host of authors to publish a piece. This year we had 5, somewhere between 4 to 6 is kind of what we target. And the professors that accept will join us for a symposium in the spring. We had our symposium this past Thursday and Friday. And they'll present their paper. They get a chance to get feedback from Penn faculty who are involved either in CTIC or other areas that really relate to the papers that they presented, as well as get feedback from the associate editors that will be working on their edit later on in the spring. And that's a little bit unique because usually you don't get that direct interaction between an author and the editors that will eventually be editing their piece. And then finally, after the symposium, we go through the edit process that takes place in a couple of weeks from then till the end of the semester in early summer to actually publish the journal. And we publish one journal volume every year. This will be volume 4 coming up. And that's the general structure. And I think, Professor, you highlighted a couple of the benefits that that structure creates, but I want to highlight a couple more in what I've really seen over the past 2 years and how it's helped me personally and how I've seen it help other students. So the first is kind of career development. The journal really helps you build your network both with your current classmates. So it will bring together everyone who's interested in, if not the exact same area, similar areas. So you'll get people who are interested in privacy, data, hard IP, soft IP, policy related to technology, really a whole gambit of fields that are at their core related and will have, the same players and companies and questions at their heart, and give you a chance to interact with them and start building that network now. It will also help you get connected to 2Ls and 3Ls and eventually a network who's graduated that are in the fields of interest to you. And I think back to when I was a 1L, I remember, especially in the spring semester, I had just picked my first elective. And beyond that, I had no idea what the law school experience is going to be like. I was still looking for what a job would be in the summer, had no idea what classes to take. And there's really not much guidance that the law school as a whole provides. But I find that the journal, and especially the students in the journal, provide great guidance. You'll have people who have taken all the classes that may be of interest to you. You'll have people who can tell you what clinics are great. They can provide you with internship opportunities, both for your 1L summer and then eventually for your 2L summer. They can connect you to professors who are doing research that may be of interest to you. So I really think that that connection is really invaluable as you go through your law school experience. And that kind of personal touch that you get from knowing someone and being in the seminar with them really does help open doors to a lot of areas of the law school that you may not be aware of otherwise. Third, I want to just talk about the strengthening of your writing abilities. I think most journals will highlight this. I personally think that our journal does a better job of strengthening your writing skills than most other journals do. And that's because we do more than just blue booking as part of our edit process. So in the spring, in advance of the symposium, we give you a chance to interact with the authors, see an early draft of their piece, and actually provide substantive feedback, and provide it early enough that they'll take those feedback into account and maybe make structural changes based on what you've said. This is pretty different than most other journals, which typically take a finished draft, and most of the student role is doing a source hunt, doing the blue booking, really polishing it off for the author. You may get some interaction with them, but typically that's reserved for the 3L or senior editor on your team. We try to give you that experience early, and because we only publish one volume a year, you really do get to focus on articles for a longer period of time and ones that are actually in your interest area. And then lastly, you get a chance to be part of a community of Penn that I think if this is your interest area, this is 100% where you want to be. So you get a chance to talk to students who have the same interests as you, professors who have the same interests as you. Our Slack channel is constantly getting hit with opportunities for jobs, internships, other things at Penn that are tech related. So I think that this is a great place to get involved for those kind of traditional community benefits. And as a whole, I think beyond just the career development, long-term goals, it will make your law school experience better while you're here. So that was a real quick hit of all the benefits I think that the unique structure provides. I'm going to turn it over now to Robert to give you a little more detail on what the fall seminar actually runs. And then I'll be back at the end to talk through quickly, I'll keep it short, quickly the symposium and the publishing process. And then I think we're going to open it up to questions at the end. So Robert, take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Zach, for that great description of the journal, and Professor Yu for giving us an introduction. It's good to see you. And also hi to Caroline. I haven't got to see her for a long time, but one of the best parts of the journal and sort of CTIC too is the community, and hopefully when we're back in person next year, you'll get to see it and feel it, and you get to do events and see people in the hallways, and it's really great. But quickly on sort of the seminar side of this. So the first thing I want to say is it is 2 credits in the fall and 2 credits in the spring. And for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with, or maybe you've seen this, you're not really sure what it means, is like how those credits apply towards your JD. And so for other journals, they actually count towards something called like a co-curricular, which there's like a capped credit amount. And I just mentioned this because I just did my graduation audit just to see where things fell. And I'm sharing this because I think it is sort of actually relevant because it went through my mind when I was in this process. And the 4 credits for JLI actually don't count as co-curricular. They count towards like any other class you'd be in, like internet law or like intro to IP. So it doesn't like eat away at your co-curricular activities that a normal journal does. So don't think if you're thinking of doing 2 journals or if you're thinking of doing other things like this is eating away at those. Like it actually doesn't. And so it's kind of one of the benefits, I think, to doing sort of JLI. And so it's 2 credits in the fall, 2 credits in the spring. The seminar in the fall, it meets once a week, or we met once a week. And it was for 2 hours, I believe. And basically you just go over articles that relate to the topic of what you're doing. But at the same time, it's not static. And so what I mean by that is as you progress in the class and as sort of the interests of the journal progress too, the professor will sort of adjust, or at least we did. We adjusted sort of what we were reading, or we added things, or we took things out. And it was really great because it sort of meant we were kind of forming our own ideas of the direction we wanted to go. And also it kept engagement really up. I think in the beginning of the course, as we were figuring things out, Professor Wagner definitely sort of led a little bit more. But then by the end, it was really just like the students constantly talking and he couldn't really get a word in edgewise. I don't know if Zach agrees with that. I mean, I think that's kind of how I saw things going, which was great because I think, you know, it was really fun and we kind of talked as much as we want. And, you know, there were a few weeks where there was a lot happening in the world. And as a class, we were like, you know what, I think we're just going to stop it after like an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes because we were all really tired and this is just a tough week. And I think it was great because other classes, we went like all the way to the end and, you know, we could have kept going if we didn't get stopped. So it was really fun. And like Zach said, it goes beyond that because in between all of this, you're interacting with other students in your class, you're interacting with upper level students and learning about like the school and learning about like other classes because a lot of times things get brought in from other classes you're talking about. And it's just a really fun class that just is you know, it was definitely one of my favorite things to do every week for 2 hours. I was like, this is the class I look forward to. So it was great in that sense. And like I said, the papers you'll read or the things you'll be reading, sort of some are published and then some are sort of forthcoming. So there's sort of a variation in sort of what the papers look like or at what stage they're at, which I think gives a lot of value to what Zach said about writing and seeing how a finished piece looks versus how like a forthcoming piece looks. And so you even get that feel when you're in the seminar and then you can sort of apply it in the spring. And then the last thing I'll say is just, you know, the seminar is great and it's going to be, I think it's going to be great next year. I know we haven't decided who it's going to be, but I can tell you they're going to do a great job. There's no final for the seminar. You normally do like a paper at some point in the middle of it. The way it worked for us was we did like one paper and that for 1 week. And when you did that paper, you sort of could be more helpful in the discussion. Like they would kind of default to you if there was a question or they would sort of expect you to sort of lead it a little bit more. But even then, if that's like not something that was stressful because it was something too where the faculty advisor being there, they sort of helped everything. So they would sort of keep the ball rolling and sort of played to everyone's strengths. And it was really fun. And yeah.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I agree. There were definitely weeks when Professor Wagner struggled to get his comments in, but I think that's a sign of a good discussion, the fact that people are engaged. So I take that as a positive. We'll have to check back with him. I also just want to highlight, separate from the seminar, but in the fall, Professor, you mentioned early on, we do a happy hour that brings together the CTIC faculty with the new journal, both board and journal members, which is a great chance because at that point, you may have met 1 or 2 of those faculty members, but you will probably take classes with, if not all of them, a good number of them. So it's a great way to get to know them. And outside of the school setting, I think it's really fun. We learned a lot of fun facts about the CTIC faculty during this year's. I think I'll hold off on some of those till you guys actually join next fall, but it's just a really fun event. And then in addition to that, we did a trivia night, which obviously we try to do it in person usually, but this year we had to do it remotely. So we did a trivia night in the fall. I think 2 years ago, we went to the Franklin Institute and had, they kept the building open late one night so you could join and you go and kind of see all the exhibits and also get a drink and walk around. So it was a really fun event. And I think we're going to continue to do that and build out the social events, hopefully in person if possible next year. So moving on from the seminar, I just want to then kind of come to the spring semester. So I mentioned this earlier, but we host a symposium. Usually we bring 4 or 5 authors in, and authors present a draft of their paper. And I want to turn it over to another 2L who's here, who was very involved in that process because he was involved in one of those drafts. Albertine, you want to jump in and tell us about both your process as a presenter, essentially, but 2, what it was like as an editor in advance of the symposium, because you saw it from both sides.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by saying that the symposium is a really interesting thing to be a part of. I think most journals have a symposium, but it's less involved than this. You don't really get to meet the authors, which we got to do. So the process for other authors' papers is that you are given their paper, you read it, and then you actually have a conversation with them to give them substantive feedback, to discuss the paper, et cetera. And I think that's really interesting in terms of an interaction, because that's not something that you normally get to do with other scholars in the field. And a lot of times, like even professors at Penn are quite busy. So it's really cool to be able to be a substantive part of that process, because in a lot of journals, you just like edit for like blue book sites and like source hunts, things like that, but you don't really like get input in that. So you take a look at that paper, and then they present it at the conference, and the format is that they present it, and then another couple of professors have comments on their paper. So it's like a very interesting back and forth almost about the paper and about the topic that the paper is about. On the other side, so Professor Yu and I are co-authoring a paper on contact tracing and privacy. And we presented it at the symposium. So the process there was that we spent a couple of very late nights working on slides that reviewed our paper. And we gave the paper to a couple of professors, Professor Allen and Professor Steinfeld, and they were the ones who commented on that paper. So it was really cool because we got to interact with a bunch of students, answer questions, and also to hear professors give their substantive thoughts and critiques, and help us shape the future of the paper.
Great, thanks, Albertine. I think kind of highlights something there that is somewhat unique to our symposium process. Not only do you get the pre-symposium input because it's a draft and you get to meet with the author in advance of the symposium, but the presentation of your paper at the symposium is early enough in your writing process that you're still kind of crafting and shaping what ends up being published in the final version. And so I'm excited for all the editors this year to see how the drafts change from the one they reviewed about 2 weeks ago to the one that they get when it's time to actually start editing, and hopefully see the fact that their substantive input helps the writing process. So I think it's pretty unique, and it's just a really fun event as well. I wish we could have had it in person this year. In past years, it's a one day, you have it in person, followed by a big dinner that's hosted by CTIC for the authors as well as the editors. At least that's what it was last year. Hopefully we can go back to that at some point next year. And then lastly, I just want to jump to the publication process. So after the symposium, we received the drafts from the authors. And at this point, it follows a typical journal process. And I highlight this because one reason a lot of people join journals is to get experience blue booking and to highlight for potential employers or clerkships or whatever it is that they have the skill set to do the blue booking process and do the editing process once they graduate. And so you will only go through this process for one paper. You'll get really in depth with it, and you'll learn that skill set and be able to put that on your resume. So if one of the reasons or one of your motivations for joining a journal is to get that, you'll get that here. I will say, once you get into the blue booking process, or if you're in it now because it's your LPS memo for the first time, it's not the most pleasant experience. And the fact that we do one publication versus 4 or 7 or however many other journals do, I think you'll come to appreciate that if you do end up joining our journal next year. So that's kind of the last piece of the publication process. We have a quick summary of what the application process will look like for future applicants. And largely it's split into three pieces. Well, actually, let me take a step back. I realized that you guys may not be familiar with the typical journal application process. So at the end of this semester, there's something called the writing competition, where most of the other journals of the school will have you participate in a 2-day blue booking bonanza, followed by an opportunity to, I think, write an essay and submit an essay. I went through it. I personally don't find it a fun experience, but some people dig that and they love it. So our journal runs through a separate process, and our process, I think, is less focused on blue booking and be more of an opportunity to show your interest and express your interest in this area. So what we do is we will share a draft of a paper with you, or actually maybe a published paper. We're still picking it. Similar to any paper that you'd read in the fall seminar. And then we give you a chance to write, I think, 1,000-word memo about, substantive changes you might make, ways in which you could restructure the paper, arguments that weren't made. Ideally, you spend 5 or 6 hours on it total. So it's a pretty short, contained process. It involves minimal outside research, if at all. And then you submit that to us. I think we're going to try to release the application maybe Sunday or maybe next Sunday. And then it won't be due until after spring break. So once that application goes out, we'll have the firm dates attached, but you'll be able to do this whole process, get your application in, and you'll hear back before the writing competition even begins. So I think that's definitely a benefit, because before the writing process starts exactly that you either do or do not have a place in the Journal of Law and Innovation. And from the outset, I can tell you that we're really looking for students that are interested in innovation, interested in technology, and want to be part of this community. And so if you're able to convey that via your memo review, as well as I think we have you indicate which classes you've taken or plan to take in this field. I think those two factors are the biggest part of the application. And it's not a huge process, but we encourage everyone, if you're serious about this, to come through and apply. That wraps up all the substantive items I want to talk about. Is there anything I missed? Professor Yu, any topics I missed?
Two things. There is a substantive requirement that every student on the journal have taken at least one tech law class, just to make sure that if you're actually interested in this is a non-requirement. I mean, most of you, I know most of you are already doing it now. So I mean, or have already done it now.
I think we're committing to take it in the fall.
Or committing to take it in the fall, or I think even in the spring. But this, just again, that's not much of a requirement. It's just sort of self-selection, just if you're interested in this space. The other thing is just to emphasize, many journal members do JLI in addition to another journal. And because it's taught as a class, it's not too much of it works out, because that relieves your curriculum, your scholarly obligations in the class in a subject matter in a seminar you'd probably want to take already. So that works out very well. So it is an example. It's not a choice of whether you're going to do this or another journal. You can do both. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some people choose only to do JLI, and that's fine too. It's just a question, it gives you the total latitude to arrange that however makes sense for you.
Along that line, I am on another journal as well, in addition to JLI, or I was last year, I'm not this year. I don't know, Apper Team, Robert, are you guys on a second journal?
Yeah, both of us are on law review.
Okay. So I think the split is about 50-50. I'm not positive. There may be more than that who do two journals, but I got a couple of eyebrow raised during the application process, like, oh, you're on two journals. So I would say that's the only kind of, it's probably a benefit, honestly, that they see you on two journals. But the only kind of strange quirk about being on two journals is that. So
yeah, I'll also follow up this by saying, so for a lot of people, if they know they're going to be on JLI, sometimes they just don't participate in the writing competition, because this is kind of the only thing they were really interested in, and that's kind of what they want to pursue. But if you want to do two, Operative and I think, Operative, if you think I'm wrong about this, feel free to jump in. But I think there's a huge benefit to being on both. I think they're just very different processes, and I think they both teach sort of different skills, whether you do another student-run journal and JLI. So I think it's a great thing, and like Zach said, it did come up a few times in OCI, where it's kind of you're on two, and you kind of explain how they're different. And I think it was kind of a great sort of discussion to have during the interview, because they are very different in the way they work and operate.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, the two journals are pretty substantively different. And I think, Zach and Professor, you and I were talking about this, right? Like, you're way more involved in the actual substance here, whereas in law review and other journals, it's really editing and sort of a lot of tedious work about like looking for sources and things like that. So it's definitely doable. I think this journal is sort of more rewarding because you get to be in a seminar and just like talk about tech stuff. And to that extent, ACS is going to be having an event where we sort of talk about what journals generally do next Thursday. So just plugging that if you guys are interested and want some context.
One other thing, by the way, it's not unusual in other schools. It's not unusual to see people in more than one journal. It's just the way we structured it is historically, this is the first time that's been possible. So I don't think employers are that confused by it once it's explained.
Yeah, I think they probably viewed it as a plus. All the people I talked to thought it was, indicative of being involved in something you're actually interested in, which I think most employers want to see.
So, I mean, I don't know. I hesitate to pick this up, but just to make this very clear, just because I went to business school before I went to law school, and business school people look for jobs like nobody looked for jobs. I mean, they're very, very directed. And what you'll discover is one of the huge issues you face, particularly coming out of your 1L year, is shaping your interest in the mind of the employer. It's actually not even what you know, but it's signaling a commitment and a focus in what you're doing. And a lot of times, by having that on your resume, you're going to stimulate a conversation about subject matter that gives you the hook to have the depth. And they're already, we think of them just saying, I'm just going to go float through the firm. They're already thinking about whether you fit with the practice groups, which ones are growing and all this. And I've always said, if you have no shape, you fit nowhere. And so, and if you have no shape, if you're the best available candidate, you're fine. You don't need to worry about this. But when you're not that person, particularly if you have a shape, then you can find that fit where all of a sudden they say, maybe in an abstract, his credentials mean, or her credentials mean something, but this practice group and this person, it's great. And you run it by them and it can lead to some really great conversations. And so what I would say is, I find law students are often deathly afraid of specializing. To me, it's inevitable. There are non-specialist lawyers, we call them solo practitioners. It's just, and most everyone has to convince someone to hire them, and they develop expertise. And so what you find is pick a good field and find a way to get in the practice that really lets you have that kind of specialized expertise that will make you drive a fantastic career.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. So I think we'll kind of open it up to questions now. I don't know, Caroline, am I able to see the questions? Is there Q&A on this? Maybe just, why don't we
it's all in the chat, Zach. So you can ask for verbal questions.
Okay, so if anyone has questions, you can toss it in the chat. As I mentioned, I'll put my email in as well, so that way you guys can all see it and send me questions afterwards too. Maybe to lead off the answering of Q&As, I'll answer a question I get all the time, which is this a journal just for people who are interested in IP? And I want to emphasize that is not the case. There are definitely a lot of people who are interested in IP who are on the journal, because tech and IP, it's a big crossover. But this journal can focus on things outside of just IP. You can talk about privacy, as Professor Yu and Apperteam's paper did. You can talk about data, which I guess relates to privacy. There's a lot of questions, especially last year, was about how do policymakers prompt innovation. I know we had some papers last year that had to do with blockchain technologies, and both how are they growing, but how are they going to be regulated, and how do they fit into what we want in the larger fintech and larger financial systems. So it's not just for IP, and if that's a concern you have, I'm happy to talk about it with you after classes or after this session as well. But I think it's a great and broad view of some questions in technology. So that's a FAQ that I'll answer first. So I guess jumping into the chat, feel free to post some questions if anyone else has any.
So before, there is a question in the chat right now, but before I do that, it's not an accident we call it the Journal of Law and Innovation. I mean, we could have called it the Journal of Law and Technology. Many of them are. It's really intended to be much broader than that. And so it's, we could be talking about business structures for innovation sometimes. It's really the whole innovation process writ large.
All right, we have our first question. The question is, if we're engaged with JLI for both 2 and 3L years, do we need to take the class for credit both years, or could we participate on a voluntary or auditing basis during 3L? This is a good question. So if you join the journal, you are required to do the seminar your fall 2L. For your 3rd year, the seminar is optional. So we have a handful of exec members right now who are not in the seminar, largely because they either have credit restraints, so they can't take the class with more credits, or because they have overlapping classes, they have something else. As far as joining on a voluntary or auditing basis, I'm not positive on that. I know we have someone who's technically just auditing the edit process, because as 3Ls, you're required to participate in the edit process if you stay on with the journal. So someone is participating in the edit process for no credit. And my guess is we could figure out a way to make that work for the seminar as well, if you just want to audit the seminar.
It a little bit depends on the size of the seminar. Just, but if there's a way to make it work, we're flexible. We try to make it work.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. I'm going to drop my email in right now. So feel free to reach out to me with anything, and I can put you in touch with other board members who can tell you what their experience is like. There's a whole host of 2Ls, in addition to Robert and our team, who would be happy to answer your questions, as well as if there's anything beyond the students that needs an answer, I can direct you to the correct professor. So thank you all for joining. I don't know if, Professor, you do have any last minute words before we depart?
Not really, just thanks for all for coming, and we're looking forward to seeing you hopefully in the application process and in the journal in the fall.
Great, well, thank you all. And as Professor you said, we look forward to seeing your application soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, and thanks to Robert and Apple team, and of course our fearless and wonderful editor-in-chief, Zach.
Thanks, Caroline. Bye, everyone.
Be well. See ya.
Justin, I see your question just came in. Are you still on?
I'm still here.
Great. Okay. So your question is, since you only work on one article per year, are there other opportunities to find smaller projects with other subjects? Do you mean to get involved with professors working on different articles, or what kind of opportunities are you thinking?
Let me just spell out sort of what I'm thinking. So I'm particularly interested in the patent side of things. So I want to make sure I'm like working on a patent-based project. But I sort of have this growing interest in soft IP. And because of like this one article per year thing, I was wondering what are ways I can sort of explore that soft IP interest through the journal in 2L year specifically.
Of course. So on the journal itself, there are going to be papers that are written about maybe patents, actually, maybe not always, but there's going to be something that's not hard IP for one of the articles. So we could get you involved with one of those articles, as well as, and this is kind of goes to those opportunities that the journal opens up just through the networks that you're going to build. I think all the students on the journal will probably be able to direct you best to those opportunities. So there's the Transactional Law Clinic here at Penn, which I was on. I know a lot of the students were also on, which gives you exposure to a lot of soft IP, trademarks, copyrights, sometimes even data and privacy for the project I was on. And that's a great way to get plugged in and actually practice those skills and see if soft IP is of interest to you. There are also professors here at Penn that are working on soft IP side work. And I actually don't know if any current members are doing any work with Professor Balganesh or any of his copyrighted work, but I'm sure that that's someone who would be interested in taking on students to help him with this writing process, and the journal can kind of help get you plugged in there.
So Justin, I would answer this a little bit from something I'll spill out a little bit beyond the journal. Once you enter the community and bump into us, I mean, you'll start working with, you'll have different opportunities. So we're in the process of organizing 2 separate events for student organizations, or even just a single student who had an idea under the CTIC umbrella. And if there's a good idea that's going to find interest in the community, we'll just do it, And particularly in this year where a lot of people's first year summers cratered. I ended up taking on 3 students, and I'm actually writing 3 papers that I didn't necessarily expect to be writing. They're all different. I'll tell you right now, 2 of them are privacy, one's on spectrum policy. And it's just, they're very different, going in very different directions. So what I would say much more generally is I think there's some room within JLI. They'll make sure that you'll get a project that's lined up with your interests. There's usually more than enough flexibility to do that. But what I would think about this is more broadly as being part of a community, which gives you a lot of different opportunities in different places. For example, Opera Team just won a national moot court competition with Tiffany Kyung. And that's another way. It's on the, the First Amendment and Media Law Diversity Moot Court Competition, sponsored by the ABA. And that's another direction. Especially moot courts is something you can do, independent research and writing with a professor, choosing to write a seminar paper, research assistants during the term or during the summer, externships. There's a whole bunch. The Journal Law Clinic, if you mentioned patent law, Kent Jordan's patent litigation seminar, which really is, he knows patent litigation like nobody knows patent litigation. I mean, you just go. And more to the point, the Zachs and the Roberts and the Opera teams and everyone else in the journal can help you figure out, looking at the big catalog, which one of these things are the ones that really matter, and they'll know. And you'll cobble together through this community something that allows you to explore all those interests, maybe not all of them in any one experience, but through multiple experiences, which is better anyway.
Yeah, and I'll follow up by saying, like, the nice thing about the journal is the journal itself and all of its members are tapped into like all of these things at the law school. So it's constantly like things come through the journal before maybe they're put out other places. And if someone wants to take those up, you can. And as far as specifically the journal goes, the way you're staffed on articles, and Zach, you can stop me if I'm telling a wrong thing, but it is sort of self-driven. So it's not like you just get staffed randomly. There is sort of a pick and choosing that goes on, and you get to say like what you would like to do before you're assigned to the article. So it's not a static thing. It's not like you don't have a say in it. You can sort of see what's coming in, and you can decide which one maybe has all the components you're looking for, the component you want it to focus on for the journal you're staffed on.
This also is very exciting. Professor Yu, like that laundry list of sort of places I can explore is very exciting, especially in with the perspective that next semester might actually be in person. I'm really looking forward to being able to sort of seriously, casually have these type of conversations. And so in relation to that, I wanted to ask, I know some journals have sort of like physical spaces dedicated to them. Can you talk about that? Like, is there anything for JLI where I guess those conversations would be regularly had just by like hanging out there?
So obviously this year we're not in person. And then last year, I think we actually did have some assigned office space, but I think it was mostly taken by Professor Wishnick, if I'm correct on that. But so essentially 2 years ago, there was no physical space. This year, there's no physical space. I'm not sure what the future holds. I know physical space is hard to come by in the law school. But what you'll find is at least once a week or close to it, CTIC will be hosting some sort of event where there's going to be an in-person presentation. There's going to be something somewhere in the law school, and you'll find it's the same group of players that show up to all those events and the same professors. And that's really where those conversations tend to happen. At least in my experience, that's where they've happened. I don't know if, Professor Yu, if I'm wrong on that. I don't think there's a physical space.
There is not. And the reason there isn't is because we chose not to go through the regular journal process. And so there's it's sort of careful what you wish for, because if you do that, you pick up a lot of bureaucratic overhead at the same time. And I've thought about it multiple times. I like it better being flexible the way we can do it. And I don't think we miss the physical space. It's because we come together, I think, as Zach said, so often and in so many natural ways. It's just not I've never found it to be an issue. Bottom line, if the journal leadership next year tells me that physical space is important, I'll go to bat for us and I'll get us some physical space. It's just not a fight I've felt necessary to have up at this point.
Yeah, and I'll also say what Zach said about all the events is, that is where a lot of those things will happen, and it's great, and the food is always great. And definitely, like, if there was a choice between physical space or the way it's currently being done, I'm on the building committee, so I can say this as someone who has seen how it works from the administrative side of space allocation. And and what goes on there. And I would say I would totally do it the way it's been done, because you're going to have those, conversations at those events with, good food, good people, great company, and you'll get, I think, a lot more out of it. So, yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I just wanted to say before I hop off, the Leon Bridges album in the back, Zach, looking good.
Yeah, I have a rotation going through there, but Leon Bridges and Rolling Stones. I should probably take the Rolling Stones one down. It's a little inappropriate for the the famous background.
All right, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope to talk to you guys soon.
Sounds great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Professor Yu.
You're welcome.